got the Las Vegas Raiders heading to Detroit to take on the Lions as 8-point underdogs with a 46-point total. This is Showdown coverage brought to you by SharpFootballAnalysis.com. I'm your host, Adam Wilde. And before we jump over to DraftKings, let's talk about promo code ANGLES. Make sure you go over to SharpFootballAnalysis.com. Use promo code ANGLES to sign up to get your 15% off. Let's jump into the slate. One injury that we need to worry about is David Montgomery is out once again. So when we get to the Jahmyr Gibbs conversation, we'll get more into how that affects the game. But other than that, nothing really to be concerned about. Daniel Carlson looks like he may miss this game. He was limited in practice, but not something that we're going to need to worry about too terribly much. So we'll start there at the top with Amon-Ra St. Brown, one of the better target shares in the league. 11,200 is reasonable for him. He's like comparable to Keenan Allen, so it's reasonable to say you've got like between 11,000 and 12,000 is super reasonable for those guys. Not necessarily a value, but somebody worth considering. The only difficult situation here is that you can pretty much only play St. Brown and or Davante Adams, and you're probably going to play St. Brown as an 8-point home favorite, projected a full 8 points more. So it's going to be difficult to fit Davante Adams in your lineups if you're going to build towards a Detroit runaway victory, especially since the Las Vegas Raiders have had such a difficult time getting Davante Adams involved, which sounds ridiculous to say. So at 10,800, Davante Adams is just a tough sell, unfortunately. I mean, he's still going to be popular because he's Davante Adams and people are going to figure out how to fit him in. But with Jimmy Garoppolo coming back at 9,400, it's just difficult to consider Davante Adams. I mean, in tournaments, you could sell yourself the story that his roster percentage is going to be lower than what we've typically seen. So it makes a little more sense from a tournament perspective, but then you pretty much put yourself out of contention for Amon-Ra St. Brown. And that may be okay because we do have some okay value on the Detroit side of the ball because we're going to want at least 4 players probably from the Lions, maybe 5. I think there is always some viable 5-by-1 options when you are considering that a team is an 8-point home favorite. I will say make sure you're considering the Detroit defense if you're going to go with that scenario. Probably a good 50% of the time, the defense for the onslaught team is going to be in the optimal lineup when an onslaught hits. It's probably going to include the defense. So let's go down there to the quarterbacks. Jared Goff, Jimmy Garoppolo. Jared Goff, 10,400. Jimmy Garoppolo, 9,400 underneath him. Both are okay floors, I guess. Jimmy Garoppolo's got quite the low floor. He's got a under 10-point floor, while Jared Goff is looking at least 14, 15. But Jared Goff is going to be in almost every optimal lineup, considering the fact, or almost every cashing lineup, considering the fact that he is the quarterback for the 8-point home favorite. And the Lions have the ability to score quite a bit more than what they're being projected. I think it is a pretty conservative over under at that 46 points, just because the Lions have the ability to hit 30, 35, 40 on their own. That brings you down to Jimmy Garoppolo coming back from injury. He will be active for this game, but just the floor just has not been there for him. The only way that you fit Davante Adams really is if you don't go with a second quarterback. So you'd much rather have Davante Adams than Jimmy Garoppolo if you could afford it. It's just a $1,400 difference on a slate that it's going to be kind of tough to fit all the players that you want to play. So I definitely would be trying to fit Davante Adams more than I'm trying to fit Jimmy Garoppolo, especially since so much of Jimmy Garoppolo's production would probably go through Davante Adams unless it's a Jacoby Myers game, which we'll talk about in just a moment. So when we go to build lineups, we'll try to fit Adams. We do want Adams. It's just going to be really hard with St. Brown and Jared Goff being primary pieces in our builds. Like we talked about, David Montgomery out. That brings us to Jahmyr Gibbs at 8,600. Probably, he's definitely the best value of the slate. Okay, but I was paying close attention to the main slate. Jahmyr Gibbs on the main slate last week. I had him in my lineup. His usage was concerning until the game was out of hand. So he had 11 carries, he had 10 targets, caught 9 of them for like 56 yards, but his rushing upside does not appear to be there yet. That's yet. He is 12th overall pick in this draft, one of the more talented backs in the league, I believe. So 8,600 is very, very fair for him, especially when Josh Jacobs is sitting there at 8,400. And Josh Jacobs, frankly, Vegas has just been struggling on the offensive side of the ball. So it's just difficult to click on Josh Jacobs over Jahmyr Gibbs, even though Josh Jacobs is probably going to uh, get more volume. So we're going to go with Jahmyr Gibbs again. Just know 10 of Gibbs's 22 opportunities last week, or 21 opportunities, came in the passing game with very, very negative game script against the Ravens, where they were just throwing a ton and they couldn't get anything done through the air. So all they could really do is check down to Gibbs. If he doesn't get those, you're in a tough boat. So Gibbs and Jacobs is a tough decision just because, or it appears to be a tough decision when you're looking at medium projections, because Josh Jacobs is probably going to get somewhere around 20 opportunities. It's just that he has been wildly inefficient. The entire offense has been wildly inefficient. So Josh Jacobs hasn't really been able to get anything going on the ground. Through the air, he's getting some targets, but he's not getting as much yards after the catch as he was last year when he was definitely the best back in the league. So you have a tough decision, but you're just going to lean into the fundamentals. 8-point home favorite, heavy workload for Gibbs. We're just going to go with Gibbs, right? And then Josh Jacobs, you may sprinkle in, because you pretty much get the same medium projection from Jacobs as you get from Davante Adams. It's just that Jacobs is significantly cheaper. So once again, not a lot of incentive to get Jimmy Garoppolo into your lineup, because you have Jacobs and you do have Adams. So if you have a little bit of extra money, you go to Adams. If you don't have enough money, you go to Jacobs. Both of their median projections are rivaling or better than Jimmy Garoppolo, and they both function as such predominant pieces in their offense that a lot of the offense could go through either of those players. So just something to consider when you're building these Detroit 4x2s. You probably don't need to try to fit Jimmy Garoppolo and say Jacoby Myers as a skinny stack. You could just go with either Jacobs or Adams, and then maybe a punt somewhere down the line. Sam LaPorta has been playing pretty phenomenal recently. Had a couple good games strung together at 7,400. His price is getting a bit steep. He will land in a lot of the lineups just because he and Amon-Ra St. Brown make up such a large portion of the Lions passing game. And we do want to play Jared Goff, so he has to pass to somebody. With Jahmyr Gibbs being so cheap, you could probably fit Sam LaPorta in a lot of your lineups pretty comfortably. So that's something that we're going to look to do. Reynolds at 6,200s, and like a weird price range, because he can get a couple long receptions, or he could have 8 targets for 40 yards or whatever. His projection's really difficult. DraftKings usually likes to throw those players. Gabe Davis was a perfect example on the Bills slate. He's always in the $6,000 price range, because he could have 0 points or 30 points, and you bat an eye either way. Reynolds is going to be in that same position at 6,200. They usually throw those guys there, so he's a little expensive when you're looking at Sam LaPorta at 7,400, and then you're going to want Gibbs and St. Brown and Goff, right? That starts adding up. They're all values, except for St. Brown's probably not a value. He's just fair, but they will add up. So when you get to looking at Reynolds and small field stuff, single entry stuff, it just doesn't seem to be very necessary. All right, let's go down. You remember Dan Carlson may miss this game, so they do have both kickers, McCourt, right? So just something to consider. Don't kick, don't click on Dan Carlson, especially if he's a game time decision. That always annoys me when like a kicker or something is a game time decision and you don't really care because they're both the same price. It's really annoying because you'll build your CSV out and then you will realize that an hour before lock, if you did it before an hour before lock, you end up with having you know, a bunch of Dan Carlsons in your lineup. Michael Mayer at 3,800. Now we're starting to talk about some of the salary relief we probably need. So Michael Mayer is going to be a fantastic option as like the second Raider in a 4x2. If you go with like Josh Jacobs and Michael Mayer would be perfect for a Raiders 4x2, especially since Michael Mayer is the type of player who's going to thrive on like a PPR site like DraftKings, where he could get 8-ish targets or something like that on a game where they're playing keep up and they can't really get a lot done downfield. But he doesn't necessarily add to Jimmy Garoppolo's stats unless he scores a touchdown, right? So Michael Mayer is the type of player that I always like including if I'm going to omit the quarterback, because he can rack up PPR points, make good on his 3,800 easily. I mean, 5 catches makes good on his 3,800, and then still you don't add to the quarterback that you did not play. Craig Reynolds at 3,200 is someone who I wanted to consider because, like I said, Jahmyr Gibbs only got 11 opportunities. Reynolds is going to be the other back. He hasn't got a ton of involvement. I mean, Gibbs is playing a ton of snaps. They're just not rushing a lot, or at least they didn't. Right, we only have a couple game sample size with David Montgomery out, and one of them was a complete blowout to the Ravens, so it's difficult to say what they really want to do. But we saw Jamal Williams last year with DeAndre Swift. Both of them got ample opportunities at carries. A guy like Reynolds should be used more towards the goal line, kind of like Jamal Williams did last year when he led the league in touchdowns. So Reynolds at 3,200 is good salary relief when we need it. Like I said, that the Detroit players, they are values outside of St. Brown, but they are going to add up. So when we get to building in a minute, either Reynolds or Raymond, we're going to have to use just to make the lineups work. And then you just get down to a mess. I mean, this is why you already don't really want to stack the Raiders when they're 8-point road dogs. That's just typically bad practice. But then when you get down to it, you just have like a conglomerate of guys that just cannot get involved. Zamir White, Hunter Renfrow, Austin Hooper. And with Renfrow and Hooper, you're talking about guys who are on the field, but 800 for Hooper and 1,200 for Renfrow. They just cannot find opportunities. Renfrow even came out and said he thinks he can help either the Raiders or another team, and he definitely could. So it is kind of weird that he's not involved whatsoever in this offense. I find it hard to believe that Derek Carr had that much say to where Hunter Renfrow was like a top 24 wide receiver at time, a top 30 at worst, and now cannot even receive 2 targets. So none of that salary relief is really viable for the Raiders, and it just makes it that much more obvious that you want to build around the Lions. So let's go ahead and start building those lineups right now. Gibbs at captain is going to be where most people are going to want to start. You're going to want to start with Gibbs at captain because he's so cheap and he projects for some of the most volume on the slate. So Gibbs and St. Brown have similar median projections. Gibbs is a little bit lower, but he's also significantly cheaper. So then we want Brown, then we want Jared Goff, and now we have to start thinking. Let's go ahead and throw Michael Mayer in there right now, just to give us a better idea of how much salary we're going to have left over. It's not great practice to throw 2 receivers in, especially higher volume receivers like LaPorta and St. Brown when you have a running back at captain. So we'll probably have to go down just a little bit to something like Lions defense, which I like a lot, and that leaves 67. So what if we go down to a kicker from the Lions? Let's try that. Badgley's 48. Actually, ooh, so close. So close to fitting LaPorta here. Yeah, we need to save 500. So how are we going to do that? Let's go down. Kicker for Vegas. Yeah, I'm happy with that. Leaves 100 on the table. So Jahmyr Gibbs at captain, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jared Goff, Michael Mayer, McCourt or Carlson, whoever ends up playing. Remember to check that. And then Sam LaPorta leaves 100. This is a small field type situation. Nothing too special going on here, but just a good example of how you can put together a lineup with the top tier options for the Lions, because there is a pretty significant drop off after you get to down past Sam LaPorta. Once you get into Reynolds, your projectability goes down significantly for the Detroit side of the ball. So let's go ahead and try something else here. I wanted to try to do a 2x4 or 4x2 with one of the Vegas players at captain, but you're going to see it's going to prove to be pretty difficult to play either Jacobs or Adams. So I'm not even going to try with Adams. He's going to be too expensive to figure out how to get him implemented unless we go without St. Brown, which we may have to do here. We do have to go down to either Craig Reynolds or Khalif Raymond. Let's try Khalif Raymond. And then we're going to want Gibbs pretty much in every lineup. I'm going to say 4,400. So now you're back at McCourt or Carlson, and that's fine. So Josh Jacobs at captain, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jared Goff, Khalif Raymond, Jahmyr Gibbs, and McCourt or Carlson, whoever ends up getting the start. That lineup is fine, especially since Josh Jacobs can get so much volume. He can be utilized. He has a lot of paths to success, right? He could be successful as getting the 10 targets like Jahmyr Gibbs did last week, or he could have 20 carries pretty easily. And I do believe no, you cannot quite swap Jacobs for Gibbs here, so not able to do that. But you are going to have to get comfortable with either Craig Reynolds or Khalif Raymond in your lineup. But that's going to pretty much do it for today because we don't have a lot that we can do with the Vegas side of the ball. If you want to stack the Vegas offense, I mean, it is plenty easy. It's just that they're projected for 8 less points, so not really worth spending a lot of time on that. So that's going to do it for today's version of Showdown coverage, brought to you by sharpfootballanalysis.com. Make sure you're using promo code ANGLES to get 15% off site wide, and I will catch you next week. Peace.